Welcome back, footy fans, to episode 4 of the Footy Frontline Podcast. My name is Nick Tabato, and I'm joined here today by Ollie Caffrey to dissect a huge weekend of action in the land of footy. Ollie, a big round 2 has come to an end. Plenty of storylines to dissect. What are some of the big takeaways for yourself coming out of this weekend?
Yeah, the two Sydney teams are looking pretty ominous, aren't they? They're top 2 on the ladder, the Swans and the Giants. They're both undefeated and could be an all-Sydney grand final this year, the way it's looking.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 2 grand finalists at the moment still winless. Of course, one not in action, but another falling to a 0-3 start ahead of a grand final rematch on Thursday. And I think that is probably the best place to start. The Pies falling to defeat against the Saints. There were patches of them being a little bit better, but overall, St Kilda just overrunning them in key moments and coming away with quite an impressive win.
Very impressive win, but equally unimpressive from Collingwood. You just think they're going to bounce back every week. Everyone thought back at the MCG against St Kilda, they played better at Marvel, but yeah, never really looked like it. They, like you said, they had the good patches. Looked like maybe in the last quarter they'd get a bit of a run on like they have in the last 2 years. But yeah, St Kilda held firm, and yeah, Ross Lyon had some pretty interesting comments after the game. He didn't explicitly say they've been worked out, but just said there's sort of signatures to Collingwood's game that other teams have cracked onto. And I don't know if it's completely that. I think teams probably had them pinned down to a point last year, but Collingwood's pressure, it's just completely dropped off. That was what won them games last year. Their intensity in the last quarter especially, that's what won them games. It's just not there at the moment. Uncharacteristic mistakes from senior players, the pressure's not there, missed tackles. It's just a lack of intensity, a lack of hunger.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like ever since, they always talk about it's very hard to climb the mountain once you've climbed it, and you do wonder. You don't want to use the word complacency, but it does feel like it. You speak about some of those senior players who have really, their numbers and their output has really dipped. I mean, seeing players like the consistent players, like your Jack Crisps, your Steel Side Bottoms, yes, they're a year older, but you still expect a lot more from them. And there were some better signs on Thursday, I think, in the second quarter when they started to, really ramp up that pressure, get back to that trademark style. You probably thought at halftime, okay, Collingwood's in a good position to come away with the win. And look, there can be a lot of finger pointing towards the free kick count. There can be finger pointing towards Jack Higgins kicking a goal from the Monash University car park, as he said. But at the end of the day, Collingwood shouldn't have been in a position to be down by that and chasing the game in the last quarter, because most of that first quarter and in the third quarter, they were completely overrun and they were pinned into their own half. And it seems like as well, you talk about, cohesion. It almost seems like they've never played together. There's almost like a lack of chemistry. Is that something that even you're noticing, even just with their ball movement coming out of defence?
Oh, absolutely. It's bizarre. Some of the mistakes that they're making are just amateur. Even players like Steel Side Bottom, Scott Pendlebury, there was a passage of play. Jack Crisp tried to handle it to Pendlebury, or it might have been the other way around, but completely fumble in the middle of the ground, turnover, St Kilda get the ball back. It's just really strange, and we're not used to seeing it under Craig McRae, and he almost looked a bit lost for words in the press conference after the game. He was very measured like he always is, but also you could see the concern on his face that it's just like, okay, we thought we would have turned it around by now, but we haven't. So, yeah, 3 games in, you're 0-3. It's a long way back from there. The last team to win a premiership from 0-3 was North Melbourne back in the 70s, so it's not easily done at all.
Well, I was literally just about to ask. It's a long season. It's 0-3. Can you see Collingwood, I guess, in a way, resurrecting their season to a point? Like maybe not. It'd be hard for them to win a premiership. I mean, there's still plenty of football to go. We saw what GWS and Carlton did last year after slow starts, but can you see them at least turning it around to a point where they still are in the finals discussions this season?
If they get their hunger back, that's what it's all about. The hunger is everything. And we saw that last season, the desperation in games, they were never out of it. They played the minutes, like Craig McRae said. They were never out of a game. Doesn't matter if they're 5 goals down. They would always fancy the chances of storming home and getting it done in the last few minutes. But at the moment, that desperation's not there. And until that returns, you can't really consider them as finals contenders.
Well, it sets up a really big game on Thursday night against the Brisbane Lions, which we'll go into in just a sec, because it is the grand final rematch between 2 teams that are yet to win. So it's equally desperate stakes for both sides. But 2 teams that have been looking quite strong out of the gates are Geelong and Sydney. the Cats, they went to Adelaide. They recorded a very impressive win over the Crows. Tom Hawkins in particular, that 10-minute patch where he really took over. I mean, age isn't an issue when it comes to Tom Hawkins. He's still going, and even at the age that he is at now, going into his 350th game this weekend, he's still doing things that, you know, he was doing 5, 6, 7 years ago when he was in the prime of his career.
Absolutely. He's just got better as his best years have been in his 30s. It's hard to think now, but early in his career, he was a bit of a whipping boy for Geelong fans. He was the really highly touted young prospect, huge key forward they hadn't had for a while. And yeah, it took him a few years to really get his body right, get his consistency, just that confidence. But yeah, now that he's found that in the later part of his 20s into his 30s, he doesn't want to stop.
What have you... Sorry, go on.
Yeah, he spoke about it last year when there was maybe a bit of consideration about whether he'd go on next year, and he was determined to go on. There was no way, if it was his decision, he would be stopping now. It doesn't matter if he's won all those premierships. He was willing to put his body on the line and keep going.
What have you noticed about Geelong this year in terms of their turnaround? Of course, it's only 2 games. It is a small sample size, but they have been quite impressive wins, of course, hanging on against St Kilda, and a win in a very tough place in Adelaide. Of course, the Crows were desperate for a win after their loss against the Suns, but what have you noticed in these opening 2 rounds and the change from last year and what was a disappointing premiership defence in 2023?
They've just got more of their experienced players back, and they're fitter than they were this time last year. It's hard when you're playing a grand final. You have to back up again, like we're saying with Collingwood, just get that hunger. But another year into those younger guys as well, they're starting to shine. The likes of Ollie Dempsey, who we spoke about last week, and yeah, Jai Clark is just being straight into that midfield. Like before the game, I gave Geelong no chance over there. Adelaide at home, first game of the season. They lose Mitch Duncan, they lose Tom Atkins, 2 experienced midfielders, and they still get the job done. It was an unbelievable performance, defensive performance, and yeah, it was a Chris Scott masterclass, really. Adelaide played into their hands, just kept kicking the ball to Tom Stewart. And yeah, he's just an unbelievable player. Didn't make his debut in the AFL until he was 24. Had to do it the hard way through the local footy comps and the VFL, but he's one of the greatest defenders we've seen this century. And there was a discussion on social media about whether he would fit straight into Geelong's team of the century or best team of all time. And after 150 games, so I don't see how you couldn't put him in there when I matched up with the team of the century for the last century. So he's just an unbelievable player, and he's still got a lot of good footy left in him.
Do you think they can go to another level, Geelong?
Yeah, I think they can. Their younger players are still getting better. Their forward line is looking really dangerous again. Stengel was down last year after that brilliant 2022. Jeremy Cameron is just a freak. He keeps kicking goals out of nowhere. He's just a really good player. Tom Hawkins, great form. And you got guys like Ollie Henry and then Ollie Dempsey as well, the younger guys coming through that are really dangerous. Brian Myers, the start of the season, brilliantly. So, yeah, I think they can go to another level. And they just never seem to go away, Geelong, ever since a premiership in 2007. They've only missed the finals twice. So everyone writes them off as being too old, but they just keep stepping up and delivering yet again. And, yeah, you'd have to think they'd be almost a lock for finals the way they're playing this sort of footy. And who knows, top 4, could they win another premiership?
Guess we'll just have to wait and see. And one of those other teams that have been so consistent over the last 20-odd years has been Sydney. And this year they have looked brilliant out of the gates. We spoke about last Saturday night's game against the Bombers. It always throws up something. And the big storyline coming out of this was, you know, a bit of the fiery nature of the game. We saw an incident with Peter Wright and Harry Cunningham, Tom Papley's comments after the game. Quite a fiery game, an entertaining game at that as well. Plenty of goals, end-to-end. Sydney in the end just flexing in the last quarter and able to see off quite a gallant Essendon team who really put up a good fight.
Yeah, really entertaining game. Both teams got over 100 points, a lot of goals scored. But, yeah, Brad Scott came out during the week and said they wanted to have that Essendon edge back. And, yeah, they sure came out and delivered. Yeah, Peter Wright, he's probably going to be in for a bit of a holiday with that incident with Cunningham, but yeah, Essendon really took it to the Swans, and they could take a lot out of that. Like, they're not going to say that publicly, they're happy with the 5-goal loss, but yeah, I think they'll take a fair bit of confidence out of that one. But yeah, the Swans, they are just a really well-balanced footy club. They, like Geelong, never bottom out. Just their culture stacks up. They can bring these young guys through, and immediately they feel the confidence that they can perform. It is their younger guys that are stepping up, and they're just such a really good kicking team. Like the way they're just piercing through the midfield, piercing through defences, just Errol Goulden, Isaac Heaney, they're the ones stepping up for them at the moment, and not missing Buddy Franklin one.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. I mean, Isaac Heaney's played so well in the midfield to start this season. Now, when they get, we've spoken about Parker, Mills, Adams, all back. Maybe not all of them walk straight into the best midfield. If you're John Longmire, do you keep Heaney in the midfield given how well he's played, or do you get him back into the forward line playing as that hybrid sort of mid-sized forward who can create so much damage on the scoreboard, or do you keep him in the middle given how well he's started this season?
You just have to keep him in the midfield, don't you? And his three best on-ground performances in the first 3 games, potentially. And that just looks like where he's playing his best footy. We've seen him be a bit inconsistent as a forward. His goal kicking sometimes lets him down in front of goals. But yeah, in the midfield, the way he uses the footy, attacks in hard, he's a big body, runs well. So yeah, he's a tough call. You bring back 3 just elite midfielders, whether they'll fit. So that is going to be a huge challenge for John Longmire and his coaching staff about what they do with that midfield setup. But it's a good problem to have. Isaac Heaney playing the best footy of his career so far.
Well, it's as you said, a great headache going forward for John Longmire. I mean, you can have all those cooks in the kitchen, but if they've got versatility, I mean, they can go forward and impact, and you can throw the magnets around. Plan A is not working, go to plan B. It's a good little conundrum for them to have going forward. But let's have a look ahead to round 3 this weekend, the Easter weekend. Plenty of football starting on Thursday night, but finishing on Monday. And it starts with that grand final rematch, Brisbane against Collingwood. Brisbane are favourites to win this game, and rightfully so, given, that it is at home, it is at the Gabba. They've had a week off as well. Ollie, your thoughts. Does the bye help Brisbane in this situation, given how poorly they started, or is it a little bit of a weird one? Because no team usually has a bye this early in the season. Does it have a bit of that disadvantage that we see potentially later in the year where teams come off the bye and they lose a bit of momentum? How does it affect Brisbane? What are your thoughts with this?
Yeah, usually the bye, it disadvantages the Lions. They're usually very poor after a bye, but yeah, we've never seen it happen before. 2 weeks, you're playing 2 games, then all of a sudden you got a bye this early in the season. So yeah, we'll just have to find out and see. But I think the start of the season they had, losing those first 2 games, lost Kadeen Coleman, a few injuries. I think just the reset might do them a world of good. But yeah, who would have thought after one of the greatest grand finals in VFL, AFL history that would come into this Easter Thursday blockbuster and neither side would have won a game? It's just extraordinary, the start of the season they've had. But yeah, I think the Lions, they should bounce back being at the Gabba. Collingwood, you'd think, would have a response, but we've said that the last few weeks as well. And we've said that with the Lions, so we thought they'd bounce back against Fremantle. And maybe over there, that's not such a bad loss in 10 weeks' time. Freo's undefeated so far and look like they have a bit more resilience about them this season and could be back challenging for finals. But I think at the Gabba, you don't lose 2 in a row for the Lions at the Gabba. So I think the Lions should get it done. And yeah, Collingwood would be 0-4, and that would heap more pressure on Collingwood.
Yeah.
And there's already talks of there being crisis and just ridiculous sort of stuff after winning a premiership. But yeah, 0-4 would really turn the heat up.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's going to be a very closely fought game because, as you said, we've said every week that the effort's going to come back, they're going to turn it around and everything. But I do actually think I'm going to put it on the line here and say they do turn it around this week in a sense of effort. If it is enough to win at the Gabba is a whole nother question. They haven't won there since 2019. Each time they've gone there, of course, it's been different iterations of Collingwood that have played there against Brisbane, from the Nathan Buckley Collingwood to a Robert Harvey-led Collingwood in the end of 2021 to Craig McRae now going up there to Brisbane. And of course, he hadn't beaten Brisbane until that grand final last year. So there is added motivation for Brisbane knowing they are going to get a chance to really, knock Collingwood for 6 if they're able to come away with a win and get a bit of revenge for that grand final. But look, I've got to go with my heart here. I never tip against Collingwood because I've got to back them in. I think they turn around, they come away with a win here, but I think it's going to be a really, really fascinating contest. Friday night action, Good Friday action. This is North Melbourne against Carlton at Marvel Stadium. Become a bit of an annual fixture here for the Kangas, hosting the the Good Friday clash against the Blues, also coming off the bye. North Melbourne, they started so strongly against Fremantle. It was looking quite good at halftime, but faded away in that second half as Fremantle sort of ran over them, taking on a Carlton team at the moment who all their last few wins have been less by a goal, but you get a feeling that this time around against North Melbourne, they should be able to win quite comfortably.
Yeah, coming off the week's break, like Brisbane, we don't know what it's going to do for them. But yeah, North Melbourne, they've shown some pretty good signs in the first two games against pretty good teams, GWS and then Freo. But really, the Kangaroos should have won that game. Like 33 points up during the second quarter, missed a few pretty gettable chances and arguably should have put Freo to bed before half-time. So that'd be wrong, a missed opportunity there. And yeah, it doesn't get any easier this Friday with their biggest game of the year. They don't get too many blockbuster games, North Melbourne, and this is one big chance to really put their best foot forward. But yeah, it's going to be so hard for Kangaroos, especially their defence. I just don't know how they're going to go with Charlie Curnow, Harry Mackay. They could really run right against that Kangaroos defence. They just don't have any tall options really to go with them. So it could get a bit ugly, but North Melbourne in the middle, yeah, they're looking really impressive. That's where their best players are. They're going to another level. Some of those young guys, George Wardlaw, he's just going to be a superstar if his body allows him. He's just intense. Like he will never give up. Just tackle, put pressure on. He's a really good player. So yeah, Carlton will win comfortably, but yeah, North Melbourne will want to put in a good performance in front of their fans.
I think they'll actually be quite competitive in this game again, because I think it's that case of a team like North Melbourne. We saw what they did last year, started quite strongly when they played last year in that Good Friday game. They were in it for about 2.5 quarters, but really faded off as the game went on. And I think we might see something similar, because I think the one thing that would work in North Melbourne's favour, and probably even work in Collingwood's favour, is when you come up against a team coming out of the bye, if they're a little bit slow out of the gates, not having that momentum of a week off, you might be able to capitalise on that early, but as the game wears on and Carlton start getting in the motion, and we've seen that they've now got the good juju when it comes to the last quarter and finishing strongly against these teams with the experience now that they've got and the calibre of key forwards, they're probably going to win this game. I'd say by around 5 or 6 goals, but I'd be very disappointed as a North Melbourne fan if they don't at least put up a bit of a fight. You mentioned this is their big game of the year. This is penciled in as their marquee fixture. And you'd be quite disappointed if you're a Kangas fan leaving Marvel Stadium, not at least thinking, well, at least they gave it a crack. You know, we've seen some of those Good Friday games in the past, especially you think back to 2021, what the Bulldogs did to them.
Josh Bruce went nuts.
Yeah, you don't want something like that again. And I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think that was absolute rock bottom, but I think we will see a little bit more of a competitive performance from the Kangas. Over in Perth, Fremantle against the Crows. The Dockers undefeated. Adelaide still looking for that first win. Adelaide have not beaten a top 8 side on the road in quite some time. I don't think they have under Matthew Nicks, which is quite a poor record for a team that's looking to break back into the finals for the first time in 7 years. Do you give them a chance of ending this winless start and ending this hoodoo against a Dockers team that are feeling themselves at the moment?
I don't, and that would put massive pressure on Matthew Nicks. The game of the two newly re-signed coaches, the Dockers decided to re-sign Justin Longmuir before their first game of the season. It's paid off so far, but yeah, you go to Adelaide, they've re-signed Matthew Nicks to get in before the pressure comes through them, and yeah, they're 0-2, and if they go 0-3 with expectations of finals, that is a really rough start to the season. So Freo over there, they're such a dangerous team at home. Even last year, they looked very dangerous at times, even during their low patches. So I think the Dockers are just going to be too strong. That crowd is going to get them. And like you said, the Crows have been really poor on the road. They've been close, but they've got nothing to show for them. No points. So yeah, I think the Dockers by about 5 goals.
Yeah, I think the Dockers will be too strong. You know, the form of Caleb Sarong and Luke Jackson in particular has been a real positive for him, especially Luke Jackson, making that position in the ruck his own. I mean, it's been a bit of a balancing act between him and Sean Darcy, but with Darcy out, he has really made that his, and we're starting to see the best of Luke Jackson, all the hype we heard about him coming out of the draft, and we saw bits of it at Melbourne. But of course, you know, a player like him kind of got lost in the shuffle with Max Gawn, with Sean Darcy, but now he's really making that his own, which will only fuel the discussion at the end of this season as to what happens next, whether this is Luke Jackson's midfield going forward, does Darcy look elsewhere? Too early to talk about trades, but you know that it's going to start.
Oh, yeah.
I think the Dockers are going to come away, though, with the win. And as you talk about pressure, it will be ramping up on the Crows if they're 0-3, because this was penciled in as their year. This is the year that they're going to really make that next step. And you look, if they can come away with a win, though, it'd be huge for their season. But I think the Dockers are going to be too strong on that occasion. Now, this is, I think, a sleeper for game of the round.
Oh, absolutely.
Marvel Stadium, Essendon versus St Kilda. Both teams 1-1. The Saints flying as high as possible after beating Collingwood. The Bombers, I think, as we spoke about, taking a lot of positives out of that loss against Sydney. You know, this is a game that for both teams, if they want to play finals this year, these are the games that you have to win. How do you see this one going? Because it almost feels like a flip of a coin on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, if St Kilda were fully fit, they had their best 23 out there, I would bank St Kilda every day of the week. But yeah, the injuries and the unavailabilities are starting to rack up. We saw the other night Mason Wood go down early. Liam Henry, who was excellent in that game, he was really crucial to the Saints getting over the line against Collingwood. He's going to be out for about 6 weeks with a pretty bad hammy. So, and Max King potentially, without him, it's going to be really tough for the Saints. But yeah, under Ross Lyon, they just have a real grittiness about them, real resilience. Doesn't matter who's out there, they still give 100%. So, yeah, like you said, it could really be matched around. But Essendon as well, likely going to be without Peter Wright. So maybe that balances the scales with Wright and King both out. So I think Essendon might get this one done. And, yeah, they'll be flying high and their supporters will be dreaming of September after this one.
Yeah, they'll be up and about if they come away with the 4 points. You mentioned it's going to be interesting to see who sort of takes the mantle if King doesn't get off, and with Peter Wright potentially missing as well, who takes that mantle to sort of lead the forward line in their absence. You know, can Tim Membry, can Kyle Langford, you know, who do the Saints turn to in this situation? Does young Anthony Caminiti get another opportunity? I think that's going to be probably the subplot of this game. But look, I think the Saints are going to win this one. I think that you speak about Ross Lyon and what he can do, their defensive solidity is going to, I think, shine through in the way that, you know, the players like Wanganeen Millera, Jack Sinclair, those players are playing, especially Nasiah Wanganeen Millera. He was unbelievable on Thursday night, and his run-off halfback just set up everything beautifully for them. And I think that they're humming at the moment, and I think they're going to come away with quite an impressive victory over the Bombers. Another big game on Saturday. This is also a game that could really be a match of the round contender. The Power against the Demons. Now, Port Adelaide 2-0, wins against, a good win against Richmond, considering they had to battle on the road. Melbourne making it 2-0 against quite a disappointing Hawthorn team. I think this game is really going to say a lot about where both teams are at Adelaide Oval. We saw Port Adelaide win quite a resounding victory against Melbourne last year that really sort of sparked them going into the second half of the season. But how do you see this one playing out? Because I feel like it's hard to get a read on Port Adelaide after those two games. But Melbourne, it's almost a bit hard because we've seen what they did in the opening round, but we've seen how they've been able to respond in the last 2 weeks in front of their home fans. But this time at Adelaide Oval, it's going to be a packed house over there, and those Power fans are going to be up and about.
Yeah, like you said, Port Adelaide, really hard to get a read on. They played West Coast at home, and then Richmond, who don't look like they're going to do much this season. Yeah, a fair win on the road at the MCG in the end, but yeah, they were really made to work for it. So yeah, Melbourne are looking very impressive. I know they only played Hawthorn, kept Hawthorn at 5 goals, but yeah, they're looking really good, but likely going to be without Stephen May and potentially Jake Lever as well. So that leaves a massive hole in defensive lineup. So how do they go about filling the defence, which has been just their rock over the last 3 or 4 years? That's what they built their game on. But their midfield is looking as good as ever. Clayton Oliver just made a seamless return to footy. He got tagged against the Hawks and stood up to it. They really went after him, as Sam Mitchell teams do. Finn McGuinness, the tagger. But over there, I think Melbourne, they're just looking just a bit better. Yeah, like you said, Port Adelaide, I know they're at home, but yeah, just haven't convinced me one bit in the first 2 rounds of the season. I think just Melbourne are going a little bit better. That first game of the season, opening round, it was only that last quarter where they lost, and Sydney are going to be a great team this year. So there's no shame in losing the Swans up there, and I think Demons might get the the job done on the road. 2 weeks in a row, they'll be in Adelaide. They've got gathered around to back against the Crows. So
doesn't get much easier.
It would be a massive game for the Crows if they're 0-3 and going to play Melbourne in gather round. So, yeah, I think the D's.
I think if May and Lever are out, that's just going to create such a big hole in defence for Melbourne. Tom McDonald's done brilliantly since making the move back to defence, but it's still, those two are the key pillars of that team. They make them tick. You talk about the midfield, but it's defence first for them, and those two are so important. If Dixon and Marshall can get off the hook, especially Charlie Dixon, I think they're going to be too strong, especially in front of that really strong Port Adelaide crowd that they're going to have there. I think they're going to come away with the win, but it's going to be a very closely fought game. So Melbourne going to put a good fist of it, but if May and Lever are both out, I think the Power are going to be too strong. Might change my tip if we see their names on the team sheet this week, but I think it'll be the Power on Saturday night. Sunday at Marvel Stadium. Now, Dogs against Eagles. West Coast won this game last year. They've got, I don't want to say they got the wood over them, but their history is on their side. The Bulldogs, a good win in Ballarat yesterday, a game that they really needed to win. Quite an impressive performance against the Suns. Cody Waitman, brilliant, 6 goals. West Coast, quite disappointing against GWS. An impressive first quarter, but just fell away against a much better team. Do you give West Coast any hope? I mean, they've beaten the Bulldogs recently, but obviously things change very quickly in footy. Or do you think the Bulldogs make it 2 wins in a row?
Yeah, surely not again. That was easily the worst loss of the Luke Beveridge era. After that game, there was all sort of questions about his future, and that led to them missing finals and then the review that happened at the end of the season. So that was just a diabolical loss at the end of last season. But yeah, it can't happen again. Like if it did, then what does that say about the Bulldogs? Because they were really impressive against Gold Coast in Ballarat. So yeah, they'll be really fired up for this one, knowing what happened so recently. It was the second last game of last season, so it'd be fresh in their minds. And yeah, the Eagles, it's just going to be another really long season for them. Like the younger guys are showing a bit more. They're looking slightly better than they were last year, but that was the lowest of bars they're coming off. And yeah, it's staggering. They've won 5 of the last 52 games, and Adam Simpson is still in a job. Like, I know they want to have consistency and stability at the club, but you just think a fresh voice, a fresh start would just give them a bit of a boost. He's been there for 10 years, and yeah, it looks like there's still no pressure on him at all. So yeah, the Eagles will stick with him and see what happens. But yeah, you can't really see them finishing not on the bottom this year. Yeah, the rest of the teams in the competition are at least showing a bit. So yeah, the Bulldogs will have revenge on their mind, and it could get ugly.
Yeah, I think the Bulldogs win this game. I mean, West Coast, you know, I would have probably felt a bit more confident about giving them half a chance this week if they were able just to show a little bit more effort against GWS, because they started quite well, but it's just, they're so young. And even the older players, you know, we saw how brutal it was with the way Andrew Gaff was dropped last week. The older players like Elliot Yeo was very good, but even then it's a lot to rely on just the senior players who were there that took them to that premiership 6 years ago to carry them again and carry all these young players again. Oscar Allen now missing. It always seems like with West Coast when it rains, it pours.
So many injuries all the time that it hasn't been fixed at all. They brought in new fitness staff, fitness boss over the off season, but it doesn't really seem to make a difference. Like, to be without Oscar Allen for up to 8 weeks, that's just so bad for them.
I think it's just straight up the club's cursed. Yeah. Something hasn't gone right ever since they won that premiership. It's like the good juju of the Dom Sheed goal and all the, you know, how much of a miracle goal it was. Everything since then has just gone bad. So they got the good, but now they get the bad. But anyways, moving on to the other game on Sunday, Richmond against Sydney at the G. Sydney, I mean, 3-0 against the Tigers, who are 0-3. Richmond, to their credit, in the last 2 games, competitive. But all these outs just mounting up against a team in Sydney who play the G brilliantly. They were great against the Pies there a few weeks ago. Any reason to tip against Sydney on Sunday?
You wouldn't think so, but I did give Richmond a massive chance against Port Adelaide until Nathan Broad and Jacob Hopper were laid out. So, yeah, the injuries mounting up. They're already without Gibcus, Prestia for a long period. So it's going to get tough for them. And, yeah, really rough run for Adam Muse and his start to his coaching career at Tigerland. So the Swans, they do play the MCG pretty well. They lost all their games there last year, but traditionally before that, they were really good MCG team and just the bigger ground. So I think it actually suits them in a way more than the SCG, the way they're able to use their kicking, late kicking, just piercing through opposition defences. So, yeah, you'd think the Swans would win this pretty comfortably. But, yeah, there's enough fight in Richmond, an undermanned Richmond, to give the supporters something.
I think they'll be very competitive again. I think that's going to be the sort of the hallmark of Richmond this year, is that they're always going to fight. It's just, as you mentioned, the injuries, not having the same amount of talent is going to cost them in these big games. So I think Sydney are just going to be too strong. They'll go 4-0. They're going to be humming. Richmond, a bit to ponder, though, after this week. So we'll see if they can turn it around and gather around, but I don't think it will be this weekend. Easter Monday, the traditional game, Hawthorn versus Geelong. I mean, in years gone by, this was always a flip of a coin. For a while, it was just Geelong always beating Hawthorn. It changed a little bit. It's weird because usually Hawthorn get up for these games, and I actually think they will this time around, because talking about pressure, it's on at Hawthorn right now. 2 losses, a really disappointing showing against Melbourne after the green shoot shown against the Bombers. Do you give them any chance? It's Easter Monday. You talk about the big occasion. Hawthorn will want to see a response. And the last thing that Hawks fans will want to see is a bad loss against Geelong in their game on Easter Monday.
I give them a sneaky chance just because of the history of these games. Like you mentioned, it is just a crazy rivalry, something similar to the Essendon and Sydney rivalry. It just always seems to produce something. Go back 2 years ago, Geelong won the premiership. They looked unbeatable at the end of that season. But in this same game 2 years ago, Hawthorn got up and won.
Yeah.
So you can't discount the Hawks at all. But, yeah, they'd really want to make up for that performance against the D's. The D's are a great side, obviously, but, yeah, it just wasn't good enough for a team that third season under Sam Mitchell would want to be showing a bit more. And, yeah, they've got some decisions to make on some of their older players. Jack Gunson, who they brought back from Brisbane, he was the sub on the weekend. He's looking maybe a bit old, bit slow. So, yeah, what's they do with him? But, yeah, it's just going to be those younger guys that can really lift them and take them to another level. Their midfield looks pretty good, but they were badly beaten against Melbourne. So the likes of Jai Newcomb, some of those guys really need to step up and just match it with a midfield that, yeah, Geelong might without Patrick Dangerfield. So that squares the ledger up in the midfield a bit. But, yeah, you'd think the Geelong Cats would get up in this one, but, yeah, you never know in these games that you go back to the Kennett curse, could be flipped this time.
I'm going out on a limb and I'm saying Hawthorn win.
Oh, wow.
I'm going big. I get this feeling that they are going to win this game. It's just that gut feeling of like, you could see it happening. And Sam Mitchell knows the rivalry like the back of his hand, and he's going to have the players up for this one. They got battered last year in this fixture, and that was the game that got Geelong their first win of the season last year. But I don't think he's going to want to lose this one again like that. And especially after that loss against Melbourne, he's going to put the rocket up them. And I think if there's one player who will certainly thrive in this sort of game, it's a man with the long sleeves in Jack Ginnivan. I think he's got a big game in him. And I think Hawthorn are going to get this done. I could have massive egg on my face by the time we're back here next week. But I just have this gut feeling that the Hawks are going to come away with a very, very impressive win over Geelong. So
I like it.
You know what? Sometimes you just got to go on a bit of a limb, and this I think it might actually happen. So we'll see how all of round 3 plays out. But thank you very much for watching the Footy Frontline podcast, brought to you by my betting mates. I've been Nick Tabano. Thank you very much again, Ollie, for joining me.
Thanks, Nick.
Enjoy the footy this weekend, guys.